The judge didn't look angry. He didn't look shocked either. He leaned back slightly in his chair, adjusted his glasses, and then did something no one in that courtroom expected. He laughed. Not loudly, not mockingly, just a quiet, controlled laugh, the kind that makes everyone else suddenly very uncomfortable. Grant was still leaning toward me, his mouth close to my ear, his voice low and venomous. "You'll never touch my money again," he whispered, smiling. That was when the judge looked up at him and said, "Mr. White, I suggest you stop talking." Grant froze. But I'm getting ahead of myself. To understand why a federal judge laughed in the middle of my divorce hearing, you need to know who Grant White really was and who I was supposed to be. My name is Jennifer White. I'm 38 years old. Until recently, I was married to one of Nashville's most respected real estate developers. On paper, my life looked perfect. Grant White, self-made millionaire, commercial properties across 3 states, a regular name at charity galas and fundraising dinners. And me, his elegant, supportive wife, always smiling, always composed, always standing just half a step behind him. People used to tell me how lucky I was. What they didn't see was how carefully my life had been dismantled, piece by piece, until there was almost nothing left that belonged to me. I met Grant when I was 29. I was a university lecturer back then, teaching marketing strategy. I loved it. I loved the classroom, the energy, the feeling that my mind actually mattered. Grant loved that about me. At first, he said he admired my intelligence, that I made him sharper. He used to ask my opinion on deals, let me review proposals, even joked that I should be billing him as a consultant. Then, slowly, things changed. It started small. "You're working too hard," he said. "Why stress yourself when I can take care of us?" When I got pregnant and later miscarried, he gently suggested I take a leave from teaching, just temporarily, he said. Temporary became permanent. By the time I realized I hadn't stepped into a classroom in almost 3 years, my department had replaced me. Grant handled everything financial by then. All the accounts were simplified. My name was removed from some for tax efficiency. My credit cards were replaced with one shared card that he monitored to protect us. Anytime I asked questions, his mother stepped in, Lydia White. If Grant was the face of the White family empire, Lydia was the spine. She ran the White Hope Foundation, their charitable arm, scholarships, housing initiatives, community redevelopment projects. Everyone adored her. She adored control. Whenever I raised concerns, Lydia smiled politely and reminded me that money was complex and best left to people with experience. I was encouraged to focus on being supportive, grateful, quiet, and for a long time, I was. Until one afternoon changed everything. Grant had left his laptop open on the kitchen counter. That alone was unusual. He guarded his devices like state secrets. A notification flashed briefly on the screen, a banking alert. I wasn't snooping. I wasn't suspicious yet. I was curious. The transfer amount caught my eye, $180,000. The destination didn't. It wasn't one of Grant's companies. It wasn't the foundation. It was an offshore account, Panama. I told myself there had to be an explanation. There always was, right? That night, while Grant slept, I opened the laptop again. What I found wasn't one transaction. It was a pattern. Monthly transfers, different shell accounts, amounts small enough not to raise alarms individually, devastating when added together. I didn't confront him. Not yet. Instead, I started paying attention. I noticed how often Grant and Lydia spoke in hushed tones when I entered a room, how his assistant, Claire, suddenly stopped making eye contact with me. Claire had been friendly once, almost too friendly. Now she barely acknowledged my existence. Within a week, I'd copied enough documents to know something was very wrong. Within 2 weeks, I realized how deep it went. The White Hope Foundation wasn't just a charity, it was a funnel. Donations came in, money went out, but not to the causes people thought they were supporting. It flowed through fake vendors, phantom consulting firms, overseas accounts tied back to Grant, Lydia, and Claire. This wasn't tax optimization, it was laundering. I sat alone in my home office at 2 in the morning, surrounded by printed statements and screenshots, my hands shaking. I wasn't just married to a controlling man, I was living with criminals, and they had made one fatal mistake. They had assumed I was still the woman they had trained me to be. Before I continue, if you're enjoying this story so far, take a moment to let me know in the comments where you're listening from. I read every single one. Now, back to the part where everything changed. I needed help, real help, and I knew exactly who to call. Marlon Pierce. He had been one of my brightest students years ago. Sharp, quiet, always asking the right questions. Last I heard of him, he worked in financial crimes. When he answered the phone, there was a long pause after I told him my name. Then he said very calmly, "Jennifer, you need to stop talking right now. I'm going to give you a number. Call it and do exactly what they tell you." That was the moment I stopped being a victim and became a witness. From the outside, nothing changed. I was still Grant White's quiet wife, still attended events, still smiled when Lydia squeezed my arm a little too tightly, still nodded politely when Claire avoided my eyes. That was the most dangerous part. They thought they had already won. The FBI moved faster than I expected. Within 48 hours of my call, I was sitting in a small, windowless room with 2 agents who asked very precise questions and wrote down everything I said. They already knew some of the names. They just didn't know how the pieces fit together. That's where I came in. Marlon explained it to me calmly, like he was walking me through a case study. "You're not going to confront anyone," he said. "You're not going to accuse. You're going to do exactly what you've been doing." I smiled bitterly. "Disappear?" "Observe," he corrected. "And document." They gave me a pen. It looked ordinary, sleek, silver, expensive enough to pass as one of Grant's gifts. It recorded everything. Every conversation, every whisper, every careless confession spoken in rooms where they thought no one was listening. For 8 weeks, I wore that pen everywhere, to charity board meetings, to dinners with Grant's investors, to Lydia's afternoon planning sessions at the foundation. I learned very quickly how sloppy, powerful people become when they believe someone is beneath them. Grant talked freely around me. He complained about donors who were too curious. He joked about how easy it was to move money through the foundation if you knew the right paperwork tricks. Once, while pouring himself a drink, he laughed and said, "Charity is the best tax shelter God ever invented." Lydia was worse. She spoke about numbers like they were chess pieces, cold, precise, disposable. When a donor questioned a missing grant, she waved it off. "People don't understand accounting," she said. "They just understand confidence." Claire was the most careless of all. She was young, ambitious, desperate to prove she belonged in their world. She bragged about setting up shell companies, about rerouting funds through consulting firms that didn't exist. Once, she leaned toward Lydia and said, "If anyone ever audits us, we just point them at Jennifer. She signs enough documents to make it believable." I kept my face still. Inside, something hardened. That night, I cried in the bathroom with the shower running so Grant wouldn't hear me. Not because I was scared, because I finally understood the plan. They weren't just stealing, they were building me as their exit strategy. The surveillance started soon after. At first, I thought I was imagining it. My phone battery draining faster than usual, a faint clicking noise when I made calls, a new smoke detector installed in the hallway, one Grant swore he didn't remember buying. The FBI confirmed it within minutes. Hidden microphones, tracking software. They were watching me. Not because they suspected me, because they never stopped controlling. Grant needed to know where I was, who I spoke to, what I might cost him. The irony was almost unbearable. They thought they were trapping me. In reality, they were tightening the noose around themselves. The most important piece came by accident. It always does. One afternoon, Claire sent me an email. She meant to send it to Lydia. The subject line was harmless enough. Updated account flow. Confidential. Inside was everything: account numbers, offshore transfers, dummy corporations, a timeline mapping exactly how money moved from donors to overseas accounts. There was even a note at the bottom: if anything goes wrong, remember, Jennifer signs the foundation paperwork. I forwarded it to Marlon immediately. He didn't reply for almost an hour. When he finally did, it was just one sentence: "This changes everything." From that point on, it was no longer about collecting evidence. It was about timing. The divorce became part of the strategy. Grant announced it over dinner like a business decision. "I think we've grown apart," he said calmly. "You don't contribute anymore. You don't challenge me. I need someone who understands my world." Lydia nodded approvingly. Claire didn't even pretend to be surprised. The divorce filings were aggressive. Grant's lawyer painted me as a dependent spouse who had never contributed financially, someone who lived off Grant's generosity, someone who deserved very little. I played my role perfectly. I didn't argue, didn't demand assets, didn't ask for explanations. I let them believe exactly what they wanted to believe: that I was weak, that I was scared, that I had nothing. Behind the scenes, the FBI prepared. They advised me to let Grant think he was in control, so I did. At mediation, I sat quietly while his attorney spoke for him. "She never earned $1 during this marriage. She has no claim to my client's finances." Grant watched me with satisfaction. He leaned toward me once and said, "This is what happens when you forget your place." I lowered my eyes. If you've made it this far in the story, you already know something is coming. Just stay with me a little longer. The final hearing was scheduled for a Thursday morning. Grant was confident, too confident. The night before, he sent me a message. "Thank you for being reasonable," it read. "This didn't have to be ugly." I didn't reply. Instead, I placed the sealed envelope into my bag. Inside were copies of every recording, every bank transfer, every email, along with a letter written in my own words, addressed directly to the judge. The letter Grant would never see until it was too late. The courtroom was quieter than I expected. Not silent, just heavy. The kind of quiet that settles in places where decisions are final and excuses don't matter anymore. Grant arrived early. Of course he did. He wore a tailored navy suit, the one I'd helped him choose years ago for a charity gala. His hair was perfect, his posture relaxed, a man who believed the outcome had already been decided. Lydia sat behind him, hands folded neatly in her lap, her expression calm and superior. Claire wasn't in the courtroom, but I'd seen her pacing the hallway earlier, phone glued to her hand. I arrived a few minutes later. Simple dress, no jewelry, no makeup beyond the bare minimum. I looked exactly how Grant expected me to look: small, tired, beaten. The judge entered and everyone stood. He was older than I expected, sharp eyes, calm demeanor. A man who had seen every version of human dishonesty walk into his courtroom believing they were special. Grant's attorney spoke first. He was polished, confident, almost bored. He described Grant as a self-made man, a provider. He described me as a dependent spouse who had never contributed a cent. "She lived comfortably off my client's success," he said, "and now she's attempting to take what she didn't earn." Grant turned slightly toward me then. He smiled, and that's when he whispered it: "You'll never touch my money again." It wasn't loud. No one else heard it, just me. When it was my turn to speak, I stood slowly. My hands shook, not because I was nervous, but because I needed them to. I looked at the judge and said quietly, "Your Honor, before you rule, I have something I'd like you to read." I reached into my bag and removed the envelope, sealed, thick. The bailiff took it and handed it to the judge. Grant frowned. His attorney leaned over. "Your Honor, we object." The judge raised a hand. "I'll allow it." He opened the envelope and began to read. At first, nothing happened. Then his eyebrows lifted slightly. He adjusted his glasses, turned a page, then another, and then he laughed. Not loudly, not cruelly, just enough. The sound echoed through the courtroom like a crack in glass. Grant stiffened. The judge looked up. "Mr. White," he said calmly, "do you have any idea what your wife just gave me?" Grant stood halfway out of his chair. "This is ridiculous. She's trying to manipulate the court." The judge cut him off. "No, Mr. White, she's been cooperating with the FBI for several months." The room stopped breathing. Grant's face drained of color. Lydia stood abruptly. "That's not possible. This is a civil matter." At that moment, two men in dark suits entered through the side door. They didn't rush. They didn't speak loudly. They walked with the quiet certainty of people who already had everything they needed. One of them held up a badge. "Grant White, Lydia White, Claire Simmons," he said evenly. "You are under arrest for conspiracy, wire fraud, and money laundering." Grant turned toward me. His mouth opened. No words came out. The judge leaned back slightly in his chair. "That letter," he tapped the envelope, "was very thorough, Mrs. White. Very, well, organized." He smiled. "Your marketing background shows." Grant was handcuffed in front of everyone. So was Lydia. Claire tried to run. She made it 3 steps. The courtroom erupted in whispers as they were let out. I remained standing, still, silent. The judge cleared his throat. "As for the divorce proceedings, given the circumstances, all legitimate marital assets remain with Mrs. White. Any assets tied to criminal activity are now subject to federal seizure." He looked directly at me. "You're free to go." I walked out of that courtroom without looking back. By the time the elevator doors closed, my legs finally gave out. I laughed then, not because it was funny, but because it was over. The fallout was swift. Grant's properties were frozen. The foundation was shut down. Donors demanded answers. Lydia's carefully curated reputation collapsed in a matter of days. Claire took a plea deal. I didn't attend the hearings. I didn't need to. I had already won. A month later, I filed the paperwork to open my own firm, White Consulting. I help women who have been financially isolated, controlled, and underestimated. Not loudly, not aggressively, strategically. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is stay quiet long enough for the truth to catch up to the people who think they're untouchable. Grant once told me I'd never touch his money again. He was right, because I never needed it. If this story resonated with you, let me know in the comments, and if you're ready for more stories like this, you know what to do. Justice doesn't always arrive screaming. Sometimes it arrives with a letter and a judge who can't stop laughing.